For over 150 years, scientists were absolutely certain about one thing when it came to the giant squid. They were certain there were a lot of them. Not a lot of individual squid, I mean a lot of different kinds. Different species scattered all across the world's oceans. There was supposedly a giant squid species in the Atlantic, a different one in the Pacific, another one in the waters around Japan. Over the years, as more and more of these massive, mysterious creatures washed up on beaches or got hauled up in fishing nets in different corners of the globe, scientists kept looking at them and going, well, this one's from a different ocean, so it must be a different species. And they kept naming new ones. By the time they were done, they had described as many as 21 separate species of giant squid living in the oceans of the world. 21. That was the accepted science for a very, very long time. And then somebody actually checked, and it turned out we were all completely, spectacularly wrong. Not a little bit wrong, not oops, it's actually 18 species wrong. Wrong in a way that flipped the entire story of this animal on its head and uncovered a genuinely disturbing mystery that nobody has been able to solve to this day. So today, let's talk about what we got so wrong about the giant squid and the unsettling secret that discovery accidentally revealed. And real quick, if you love having everything you thought you knew turned completely upside down, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe, because that's basically the whole channel. All right, let's get into it. To understand how this happened, you first have to understand just how hard it is to study a giant squid in the first place, because this is one of the most elusive large animals on the entire planet. For most of history, we only knew it as a legend, the Kraken, the monster that supposedly dragged ships down into the deep. It was the stuff of sailors' nightmares. And for the longest time, that's genuinely all we had, stories. Because the giant squid lives deep, really deep, hundreds and hundreds of meters down, in the cold and the dark, and it does not want to be found. It's so elusive that, incredibly, nobody managed to film a living giant squid in its natural habitat until 2004. Think about that. We had photographs of the surface of Mars decades before we had a single picture of a living giant squid in the wild. That's how well this thing hides. So for a century and a half, almost everything we knew about giant squid came from dead ones. Bodies that floated to the surface or washed up on a beach somewhere or got tangled in fishing gear and dragged up from the depths. Occasionally, we'd find their remains inside the stomachs of sperm whales, which hunt them down in the deep. And that was our entire understanding of the animal. Corpses, fragments, and pieces. And here's where the mistake crept in. When you're studying an animal purely from the occasional dead body that turns up, and those bodies are turning up in totally different parts of the world, thousands of miles apart, it's actually a pretty natural assumption to make. You find a giant squid off the coast of Japan, and you find one off the coast of Florida. They're on opposite sides of the planet in completely different oceans. So surely they must be different species, right? That's how it works with most animals. Creatures separated by entire oceans usually evolve into distinct species over time. So scientists looked at these squid from scattered locations, noted the small differences between the individual bodies, and kept slapping new species names on them. Atlantic species, Pacific species, Southern Ocean species, a Japanese species, on and on. For over 150 years, that was just the accepted picture. A whole family of different giant squid species, each with its own patch of ocean. And then, finally, technology caught up, and a team of scientists decided to settle the question once and for all, the only way you truly can, with DNA. Here's what they did. They gathered tissue samples from 43 different giant squid collected from all over the entire world, from the waters off Spain, from Florida, from South Africa, from New Zealand, from the Sea of Japan, squid from basically every corner of the globe where these animals had ever turned up. Most of these samples came from the usual grim sources, bodies that had washed ashore or been dredged up dead, because that's still the only way we ever really get our hands on these things. But this time, instead of just measuring the bodies and eyeballing the differences the way scientists had done for a century, they went straight to the genetic code itself. They sequenced the DNA from each one so they could finally compare them directly at the deepest possible level and figure out once and for all how many species we were actually dealing with. No more guessing based on which ocean a corpse floated up in. just the raw genetic truth. And when the results came back, the scientists were so shocked that their first assumption was that they'd made a mistake. They thought they'd messed up the experiment because the numbers made no sense. There weren't 21 species, there weren't 3 species, there weren't even 2. There was one, just one. A single species of giant squid, the same animal, living in every ocean on the entire planet. The giant squid from Japan and the giant squid from Florida, on literally opposite sides of the world, weren't just the same species. They were almost genetically identical. A squid pulled from the waters near Japan was no more different from another Japanese squid than it was from one caught off the coast of Spain. All those different species we'd been naming for a century and a half, they were all just Architeuthis ducks. One single global animal, the exact same creature, everywhere. We had spent 150 years inventing distinctions that simply did not exist. But here's where the story takes a genuinely strange turn, because that discovery, the fact that they're all one species, wasn't even the most shocking part. The most shocking part was just how identical they all were, and that's where things get unsettling. See, when the scientists looked closely at the giant squid's DNA, they didn't just find low genetic diversity, they found almost none. The giant squid turned out to have some of the lowest genetic diversity of any animal in the entire ocean. To give you a sense of how extreme this is, its diversity was around 44 times lower than that of another squid, the Humboldt squid. It was lower than killer whales, lower than large tuna. In fact, out of nearly every marine animal scientists had ever tested, only a single one, the basking shark, had less genetic diversity than the giant squid. This was so far outside what they expected that, again, they genuinely assumed at first that they'd made an error and had to go back and recheck all their numbers. But the numbers were right. So why does that matter? Why is low genetic diversity such a big deal? Well, because of what it implies about this animal's past. And what it implies is honestly a little chilling. When a species has extremely low genetic diversity, when nearly every individual is a near copy of every other individual, it points to something specific having happened in that species' history. It points to what scientists call a bottleneck. And a bottleneck means that at some point in the not too distant past, the population of that animal crashed, and crashed hard. It means the number of living giant squid on the entire planet dropped to a tiny fraction of what it once was, down to a small, desperate group of survivors. And every single giant squid alive today, in every ocean on Earth, is descended from that little group that made it through. Let that sink in for a second. The giant squid, the legendary monster of the deep, the Kraken of 1,000 sailors' tales, the largest invertebrate predators alive, at some point came shockingly close to being wiped out entirely. Something happened, something big, that nearly drove this entire animal to extinction. And whatever it was, squeezed the global population down to almost nothing before it slowly recovered into the squid we have today. And here's the truly haunting part. We have no idea what that something was. Scientists genuinely don't know what caused it. It's a complete mystery. Some have suggested it might have been a dramatic shift in ocean conditions, a change in temperature or currents or the food supply, some environmental catastrophe deep in the past that starved most of them out. Others have wondered if it was something even harder to pin down, some event we haven't even thought of yet. But nobody knows for sure. We have this enormous, powerful, ancient creature, and hidden inside its DNA is the fingerprint of a near-extinction event, a moment when it almost vanished from the Earth completely, and we cannot explain what happened. The monster of the deep survived some kind of apocalypse, and it isn't telling us what it was. And the strangest part is that it seems to have happened relatively recently in the grand scheme of things, not tens of millions of years ago, but recently enough that the scar is still fresh in the animal's genes today. Something came for the giant squid not that long ago and very nearly finished it off. But that same discovery also answered another question that had been bugging scientists, and the answer is pretty amazing in its own right, because if giant squid are all one single species, genetically mixed together across the whole planet, then that creates a puzzle. How? How does an animal keep its genetics that uniform across entire oceans? For a squid in Japan to be nearly identical to a squid in Florida They have to somehow be part of one big interbreeding population. But adult giant squid don't seem to travel across the whole world, so how are they all mixing together? The leading answer is beautiful, and it comes down to the babies. Scientists think that baby giant squid, when they're tiny and newly hatched, drift up toward the surface waters and get swept up in the great ocean currents that flow all around the globe. These currents act like a planet-wide conveyor belt, carrying the tiny young squid enormous distances before they eventually grow, sink down into the deep, and become the giants we know. So a giant squid born in one ocean might spend its childhood drifting halfway across the world before settling down somewhere completely different. That constant global drifting, generation after generation, keeps the entire worldwide population mixed together into one single species. The giant squid isn't a local sea creature at all. It's a single, global, planet-spanning animal tied together by the currents of the entire ocean. So let's step back and look at how completely this rewrote everything. We thought there were as many as 21 different species of giant squid. There's one. We thought they were separate creatures living in separate oceans. They're a single global population, all mixed together by the currents. And hidden in that discovery, we found the ghost of a near-extinction event that almost erased this animal from existence for reasons we still cannot explain. For 150 years, we thought we understood the giant squid well enough to sort it into 21 neat little boxes, and it turned out we didn't understand it at all. We didn't even get the most basic fact right, which is simply how many of them there are. One. There's one. There always was. And maybe that's the most humbling thing about this whole story. This is one of the most famous animals in the world. The Kraken. The legendary monster of the sea. It's been in our myths and our books and our nightmares for centuries. And for all that fame, we were wrong about the most fundamental thing there is to be wrong about. And we're still standing here staring at its DNA, unable to explain the disaster written inside it. The giant squid spent centuries as a monster in our stories, and it turns out the real mystery, the one we still can't solve, was hiding inside it the entire time. If you want to know what it's actually like when one of these giants meets the one predator big enough to hunt it, the sperm whale that dives into the crushing dark to find it, then check out this video right here, because that fight in the blackness might be even stranger than the mystery we just talked about.